Okay, once again, good morning, folks. Thanks for joining us. We still have a few folks trickling in, which is great. This is Stephen Montagna. I'm the Violence Prevention Communications Coordinator for the Wisconsin Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And I want to welcome you to this second session of our policy webinar series. If you missed the first one, it is available up online. There should be a link on our website. I will verify that before we finish this session. It should be on the policy page. It's a video file uploaded on YouTube. And this session is being recorded as well and will be made available online for our members. If you've never participated in a webinar before, just some housekeeping. We will be monitoring on this end as best we can the chat window, which you'll see in your sort of GoToWebinar toolbar, which is a little floating palette that should be, it's usually on the right-hand side of your screen. And you should be able to type in there and hit enter, and that question will be posted to us. You can also, I do have you all muted, but if someone has a question, you can just ask a question, and we'll do best we can coordinating getting you unmuted so that you can ask, so we can all hear you. Otherwise, if there are any technical problems on your end, if you can type in and let us know that you're having problems with audio or that you didn't hear something or whatever, do that. If you can't even type in, or if you're having problems connecting. If you're having problems connecting, you're not listening to me speak right now. But if you have problems during the webinar with connection or something, call into the main WCASA line, 608-257-1516. We're in the back resource library, but we'll do our best to coordinate getting some technical assistance and getting you on board. Since we have not quite, just about half of the people who were registered. So, and I know that with GoToWebinar, when you start, it asks you to often ask you to download the latest version, which is one of the annoying things about using GoToWebinar. But we'll allow just another moment for some folks. Just double check this. Unless you want to, really, it's totally up to you, John, if you want to. Okay, going on camera. No, it's not. Let's see. Screen settings. Well, we might as well. You go ahead and I think we can start. Yeah, why don't we get started?
Thank you, Stephen.
Yep.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Today's webinar, as Stephen mentioned, is the second of three that we're hosting. Today we're going to talk about how to keep track of what's happening with legislation. Just logistically, how do you know who signed on to what and what's coming up next and who co-sponsors are and all that kind of thing. Last time we talked about the legislative process in very general terms, but we'll review that just very briefly today, because obviously, as you if you know what's generally to come next, you know sort of where to look and what to watch out for and all that. So we'll review the legislative process just very briefly. We'll take a look at a couple of general news outlets,
Oops. It's got to be over here.
websites.
Let's do the next slide. Yeah. There we go.
Then we'll look at a couple of very useful free tools that are available and are really all anybody needs. Most people would need to keep track of bills, what's going on with them, where they are, what might be next. And that is the state legislative notification service we'll take a look at, show you how to sign up for that. Then we'll look at a very useful, user-friendly website where you can check out bill history. That website has been revamped the last couple of years. It's a very useful tool. And then we'll look at the Ion Lobbying website, which is very useful for figuring out or helping you figure out where other groups stand on a particular measure, who might have registered in favor or opposed. Excuse me. Okay. But just very briefly again, keep in mind the general process that you're typically looking for when it comes to legislation. And this will obviously give you a heads up um, as to what's next. And we reviewed this the first time, and I won't spend very much time on it now, but just keep this in mind. Um, bills are drafted. Legislative office will have a bill drafted. Often, quite a bit of work is done at that stage, even before it's technically introduced. Um, Co-sponsors are sign on to. That means other legislators sign on to a bill. There's a formal introduction process. The bill is assigned to a committee. That committee typically holds a public hearing before voting on a measure at what's called an executive session. And then obviously this typically takes place in both houses. Each house obviously votes on a measure before it goes to the governor. So always just keep in mind this very basic process. Again, these steps can occur sometimes in a rather condensed time frame. Other times there are months between these steps. It all depends. And what we're talking about today really is how to keep track of that. Where are we in the process? Where is a bill in the process? What might be coming next?
Okay.
So one website that a lot of people look at every day and is very useful is the Wheeler Report. And it's just literally the wheelerreport.com. You see there on your screen. It's a great collection of a few different things. First of all, it contains press releases and statements from a variety of folks. If you're at an organization, or for example, here at WCASA, when we want to make a statement on an issue or a bill, one of the things we will do is we will post that press release. We will send it to the folks at the Wheeler Report, and they'll post it. It's a website that certainly everybody in town here looks at, typically reporters look at. Uh, State agencies also post releases and statements about various things. Another part of the Wheeler Report that's very useful is that they collect headlines from papers around the state. And we'll take a look at the website in a second here. But it's always very interesting. It can be very useful from an advocacy standpoint to know what is being written about an issue, not just in your hometown or not just in Madison, but in other papers around the state. So there's a collection of news stories on the Wheeler Report every day. There are also many useful links to government websites and to newspapers from around the state. Now, Stephen, why don't we go to the Wheeler Report and pull that up? I believe everybody should be seeing that on your screen at this point. Just literally, again, thewheelerreport.com. Something I check out, just look at every day. And as you go down the list, it's a pretty bare bones website, not much advertising. But you see a number of press releases there. There's a section on issues related to the governor. And then under legislative, you see a couple of statements from legislators there, Representative Nass, Senator Taylor. And then you see a couple of news stories. There, one from the Mount Pleasant Patch, the Wisconsin Radio Network, Wisconsin State Journal, again, on legislative matters of the day. There's always a section also on state agencies. This can be very useful, whether it's the DNR or there's one from the Department of Workforce Development at the top of that section, where they list upcoming meetings and hearings, things like that. Then there's usually an economy section or business section. Again, you see that there. And then if you look under statewide, that's often where they'll put press releases that have been given to them from advocacy organizations or just from an interest group of some kind. You see one there, for example, from the Wisconsin Council on Children and Families right at the top, related to the state being awarded Race to the Top funding. And then several others there as well. There's a court section. Typically, there's often an education section, and then local and federal issues as well. So again, they're not going to obviously have every article related to public policy from around the state, but it's a good collection of stories related to legislative matters, politics, from papers around the state and directly from organizations and state agencies that want to make a statement about something. So the Wheeler Report is just a very simple go-to free resource. Now you can actually subscribe. There are different subscription options that you can check out if you're interested, where you get more information, where you receive calendars of upcoming legislative activity, things like that. But this basic website is a free and good resource. Excuse me, I apologize for my coughing here today. Now let's go on to the next resource, and that's WCASA.com. And why don't we go to that right away, Stephen,
Sure.
As I'm describing it this time.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you see at the top of the page there a press releases link. Let's go to that. Again, is another place that organizations will send press releases to post in a similar way as to Wheeler Report. Let's go back to the home page. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a very useful link at the top called Events. Now that's a collection of political events, fundraisers, organizational conferences. You can see the list there. Certainly, if your group is having an event, this is one place you want to post it to let everybody know about it. There are also legislative committee hearings are posted here. Let's see, we've got under, for example, December 11th, the Natural Resources Board is meeting, for example. And then if you go down even farther, you see an example of some of the fundraisers. December 13th, the Rogansack campaign. So the political fundraisers, organizational events that might be of interest can be listed under here. It's another good resource. Let's go back to the home page briefly.
Mm-hmm.
And now on the bottom right-hand side of the page, I want to point out something under WisPolitics blogs. The first one that's up there is budget. WisPolitics has a really great, just a fabulous budget blog that they'll keep, and there are already items under there, as you see. Announcement of Joint Finance Committee members, things like that. That WisPolitics budget blog is a good tool to use, obviously, during the budget process. Something that we'll be talking about in more depth during our third webinar, which is specifically about the budget process. But this is a great resource during budget time, just for latest action. They'll blog pretty regularly during the Joint Finance Committee sessions, for example. They'll post budget summaries and budget papers as they're voted on. So it's the WisPolitics page is a great resource in general, and then specifically their budget blog is very useful. Now let's go on to the next slide, which relates to the Legislative Notification Service. There are paid services that you can subscribe to out there for keeping track of legislation. For example, there's one called Focus, which the state actually runs. But this notification service is, again, for most people, and most groups' needs is going to be sufficient, and this is another free service. Let's go to this website as we talk about it here, and we'll just walk through the process. What comes up here is the main state legislature website, and this is a great. You get a lot of different places from this homepage here. You can see on the right-hand side committee schedules, the session calendars, all things like that. What we're going to focus on first, though, is at the bottom of the page in the middle called the notification service. So let's go to that. So you have to sign up for an account, and I'm going to type in mine and just get us. Can I pull this up, Stephen? Or how do I type
how do you
in?
get into? Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, you just have to get into the field. You
Okay,
should
there
be
we
fine.
go.
There we go.
Just bear with me, and we will go through an example here so we can walk through this site. Now notified of what? Well, you can, once you set up an account, again, this is free, you can set various preferences as far as what you want to be notified of. So, for example, as it says, you could, if there's a specific bill and that's the one thing you're interested in, learning of new developments, you can go to, well, let's click under preferences. Well, you can follow it by that proposal. Excuse me. So you can choose the bill number and just lay that out, and you will be sent, once you set your preferences, daily or weekly, emails regarding that particular legislative measure. You could also do this by committee. So if you're interested in generally in issues related to criminal justice and corrections, for example, you could choose that committee, and you would receive email notification of any activities that committee engages in. So if they set a public hearing on a number of measures, you would be notified of that. If they set an executive session where they're going to vote on certain bills, you would get that. Excuse me. And obviously, you can look then, if you look under proposal and committee, you can also search by author. If you want to be made aware of everything, every legislative proposal, that your legislator, for example, from where you live, engages in, or offers, or co-sponsors, or whatever it might be, you can track it that way as well. Or by subject, you can enter keywords. Again, if it's in the criminal justice world and you want to search for, you want to be made aware of anything related to sexual assault, you would enter that term. If it's a natural resource related.
I have a question, John.
Sure.
Under author, is that just the primary author of the bill, will that also show co-sponsors? In other words, someone's local representative may very well not, may not be the author of a particular piece of legislation related to the work that the service provider is doing, but they may be on as a sponsor. Would they be able to track that?
Yes, they would. If there's a listing, and we'll look at this when we look at a specific bill example later on, there'll be a listing of legislators in the beginning of that bill, where it's basically authored by or brought forward by that group of legislators, and you would be made aware of that based on their inclusion in that list. So again, and you can make this as inclusive as you wish. You could follow all, for example, all legislative committees. If you want to be made aware of what's happening that day in the legislature, you're going to get long emails, but you can use this however you like. It's a great service. It's there all the time. Now, one thing to note is that if you set up an account, for example, if you set one up now, your name and your account will exist on January 7th at the start of the next session, but your preferences will all be cleared out. They reset all of those committees and erase all previous bills at the beginning of each session. So if you've got an account or you set one up now, just make sure you go in at the beginning of the next session, which is January 7th, and make sure you set your preferences and any committees or authors that you want to follow at that time. Obviously, committees change from session to session and members change. So, you can look on this list, and some of these people aren't that can be there January 7th, for example. All right, let's go on to the next slide if we can. And that relates to legislative bill history website. Now let's again go to the legislature's homepage.
And let's see, we'll have to go back out to, because we're logged in as you, and we want to basically get back to.
Sure, just go back.
I'm just going to back out. Is the easiest way to do it. To legislate. There we go.
So you can use the notification service to keep track of specific measures. But there's another very useful tool here, and you can use the home page again. Go to the left-hand side of the page where it says legislation. Let's look on current session, and we'll pick up an example. Say there's a bill that you know of, but you want to find out more about it. Who are the co-sponsors? Maybe you want to read the bill itself, see if there were any amendments, whatever it might be. Let's just pick one. So there's a long listing here of bills. Let's just pick Assembly Bill 20, for example, from this past session. Once you pull up a bill, and again, this is the part that they revamped, I think it was last year, and it's in a much better format, frankly. You'll see at the top, obviously, the bill number. You'll see its status. You'll see right away the important, most recent actions that have been taken. Now, obviously, since this session is really is over, a lot of bills are listed under here as failed to pass pursuant to Senate Joint Resolution 1, which basically ended the session. But before then, back in October, for example, you can see that of last year, and this is basically as far as this bill got, passage was recommended by committee. So it came out of the Jobs, Economy, and Small Business Committee on a 9-5 vote. To look at the bill itself, you can just click on bill text. A very important issue that sometimes is missed and is often not something that's picked up by the media are amendments that have been made to a bill. You can view those by clicking on there under links. Fiscal estimates, any bill that's going to have an impact financially on the state, or that it might have an impact, will typically have a fiscal estimate written for it. You can find those here. And now something that I find very useful is a record of committee proceedings, which I'm going to click to. Now this will pull up a PDF, if that's okay. So if you couldn't make, for example, couldn't make it to a public hearing, in the past, it was actually a little bit harder to find out who all testified, who appeared in favor, that kind of thing. Well, these are all listed now on this website, as you can see. There aren't too many registrations going on here on this bill, but you can find out other organizations that came to the hearing, and then how members voted. You get the actual roll call, so that's very useful too. And then it gives a complete history of the bill. From introduction, if we see, again, just looking at this example, on February 8th of 2011, it was introduced, lists all the co-sponsors there, both the representatives and the senators, and then gives each stage, each step that this bill went through. Now, when we're talking about this basic legislative process all the time, public hearing, executive session, and so on, obviously, for most bills do not become law. So most bills are gonna end. They're going to be stopped somewhere along the process. That's always important to find out. If you're working on something that has been worked on in previous sessions but didn't make it through, you want to find out exactly what exactly happened with that bill. Did it get a public hearing? Who are the co-sponsors? All that kind of thing. You can find out. Now, if we go back, and we just look at that legislation link again, this current session. Now let's see here. And down at the bottom, there it is, bottom of the left-hand side, you can look up proposals from previous sessions. So that might be important for you as we start, for example, in January. If you're interested in a topic or a bill and you want to find out what happened, like I said with it last time, you can go to previous sessions and find the same information. So really a wealth of information that's available here on the bill history website. Pretty much most of what, again, most folks are going to need to find out, you can find out on this free website. All right, let's go to the next slide. You know, when you're conducting advocacy work, it's a rare occurrence when you do that alone, right? Most legislative proposals are going to be worked on by more than one person or one organization. And it's very useful to find out what other groups might be interested, what other groups might be your allies on an issue maybe that you haven't thought of before, what groups are going to be opposed. You're going to want to know that kind of thing. Generally speaking, legislation does not sneak through. You know, it's out there, and there are a lot of groups that are going to be impacted, or just about anybody that's going to be impacted is going to weigh in, and so you're going to want to find out those kinds of things. And the Ion Lobbying website, as it's called, is a good way to do that. Let's go to that webpage if we can. Now, this has recently been revamped as well. And I'm still finding my way around this website a little bit. But obviously at the top, you can see several links. Who is lobbying? What are they lobbying about? Principal lobbying efforts. So if you're interested in, and by the way, there is a focus link as well. I referred to that earlier. That's a paid service, a paid notification service. If you're interested in more information that you can get from these free websites and the state's notification service, the focus gives you a little bit more. Notifies you, for example, as soon as an organization has registered in opposition or in favor of a bill, for example, things like that. But let's go and look at a few examples of this. Under what are they lobbying about, you can find bills on the left-hand side. Let's click on that. And again, you just search for the measure that you're interested in. Now, what did we look at before? I think it was AB 20.
Bill of 2000. Huh? Special session.
Yeah, there were a couple of options for that bill, and then you just there we go. Then you have to actually click on that title, and there we go. So you can see the organizations that were registered and who were for this bill.
2 fingers to scroll. Just no 2 fingers. If you just put 2 fingers on the pad, yeah.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yep.
You can find out the organizations that were for. So, for example, for this particular bill, you see the Cooperative Network Association, Independent Business Inc., and the Corn Growers registered in favor. You can also then access the bill text and history. That would just revert you back to the other, because these are all the websites we've looked at. Well, these last 3 anyway, minus the Wheeler Report and WisPolitics. The notification service and the bill history and this site are state websites. You can also look up lobbying organizations. So if you want to know, for example, what we at WCASA are lobbying on, those are an organization that is a lobbying organization, is a lobbying principle. So if you click on that, there's just a long list of Stephen, maybe you can
Mm-hmm.
enter WCASA or Wisconsin.
We have to
I
spell it out. All
probably,
right.
I'm not sure, but probably. And you would see all the measures that.
And do we just completion match? Like if I just hit search, yeah.
There
So
you
it'll
go.
find
Yep.
obviously our two sister
Yep.
coalitions. So that yeah, there we go.
So it gives you some information
Oh wow.
on the organization, um, lobbying interests, lobbying efforts, bills that we took action on, or that we want to register for or against, or for informational purposes. So sometimes you want to do that, by organization, perhaps. You can do it that way. Licensed lobbyist, you can do it the same if you want to find out everything that a particular lobbyist registered on. Um, so it's a good website again for advocacy work as far as finding allies, finding out what opposition you might have. If a bill is going to be introduced, say this coming session, and it's unique, it wasn't introduced exactly as such in the past, but maybe there was something similar introduced. You would want to take a little bit of time and go look at that previous bill or bills and see who registered in favor or against that. Sometimes it's surprising. It's hard to sit down and think of all your potential allies on any particular measure. Sometimes you just don't know. You just can't think of that some group would be interested in that topic. Sometimes it surprises you. Um, but it's obviously very useful to know that kind of thing. And so you can go back and you can discover a lot um, that might even be counterintuitive, but that's very useful for your advocacy work. Now, those are the main sites we wanted to talk about today. Um, Again, pretty much just about everything you're going to need to know, you can find out on these websites. Again, if you're interested in a little bit more, you can check out the Focus subscription. You could check out the Wheeler Reports paid services. Like I said, they do have a couple of things they offer um, in addition to their free website. But for most people, uh, if you sign up for the notification service and you're checking out Wheeler, you're going to be pretty up to date on what's happening. And then you can use the bill website and the lobbying website to get at a specific measure and see what's going on and check out the status of something. Again, as we talked about a bit in the first webinar, once you read about something in the paper, it's probably moved along quite a ways, right? A lot of work's probably been done on it, something already. So there might be several steps that have already taken place that you can use these websites though to find out exactly what the status is about something. Again, I want to sort of keep harping on that. That's really the first thing you want to do whenever you hear of something that you might be interested in, or you want to see if any activity is going on in a particular area of public policy. You want to look it up and see what's the status, what's the status of things, what's the status of a bill, and then keep in mind, then you'll know from your knowledge of the process itself what may be coming next. Let's go on to just again, sort of stating the obvious, but you can learn a lot about legislation from these websites and be notified of certain activities. Um, but as you can probably imagine, knowing things ahead of time is always better, right? Once a public hearing is listed, you might have a couple of weeks, maybe a few weeks, maybe a few days though before that public hearing comes up. Um, as you work as an advocate, you want to find out these things sort of before they happen. And a way to do that, again, is what we stressed during the first webinar, which is communicating and building relationships with offices and with policymakers and their staff. So, for example, if there's a bill that you're interested in, and you know that it's been assigned to a committee, for example, and thinking of the legislative process, you know that, well, the next step should be, or would be, a public hearing on that bill. Well, it might never happen, right? As we say, not all bills get passed, not all bills get public hearings. even. The way to really find out the why behind all this is, and a little bit more about learning what's happening procedurally ahead of time, is by communicating with legislative offices and staff. If it's something you're very interested in, find out look up the bill history, find the author. If you haven't had communications yet, go ahead and call that legislator's office and ask about the status of it. Even though you might have seen on paper where it stands, you'll gain a much greater understanding of why it's where it is and why it may or may not be moving, why there may not be a public hearing, or what's expected if there is. For that kind of thing, you've just got to go ahead and communicate with legislators and staff. And again, that's another opportunity as part of your effort to build relationships with these people over time. It's just something folks forget sometimes, but you don't want to just rely on the information that you find out through these news sites and through these websites. You want to dig, if it's an issue you care about, you want to dig a little deeper and find out the why and be creating relationships so you can influence that legislation. I don't think we have any questions that folks have posed. Maybe we can wait a couple minutes for that.
And let me just interject here. So I forgot to mention at the beginning, again, for those of you who are new to webinars or may have never ventured forth to actually ask a question, right now I have everyone muted just because it gets a little confusing with audio if everyone's microphones are open. But if you have a question, you should see in the little GoToWebinar control panel along the tab that sticks out on the left-hand side of it. You should see a little. It sometimes gets mistaken for an icon that looks like a bunch of flames because it's red, but it's actually a hand with an arrow, and that's the raise hand button. And if you click that on this end, we should actually see you raising your hand, and I can unmute you, and you can ask John a question. So if by any chance there's anyone out there with a question, please don't be shy. Raise your hand, and we can entertain questions at this time. You can also type a question in the question pane, which we should be able to see that.
Well, just briefly, keep in mind our final webinar as part of this brief series will be on the budget process, specifically the state budget process, which is a completely different animal from the federal process. But we'll be going into more depth on that at our final webinar. A date for that is yet to be chosen, but we'll make sure we put out word about that as soon as we choose one, which will be today or very soon. You should also feel free beyond today to contact us with any questions about any of this material. In short webinars that you can only get into things so much. You should always feel free to contact me with legislative questions, policy questions, Stephen or others here at WCASA. My contact information and Stephen's contact information are on the last slide there for you.